Okay, it's 9:30, so it's time for me to start this morning's session into the examination of the South Tyneside local plan. Just to introduce myself to everybody, I'm David Spencer, and I'm the planning inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to carry out the independent examination of the submitted plan. This is the plan submitted by the Council in March of last year, upon which people attending today's session who've made representations on the plan will have done so back in January through to March of 2024. Can everybody hear me okay in the room? Yep, thank you. Can I again please remind people to ensure that mobile phones are switched off or on their silent settings, please? Can I check, is there anybody here this morning from the local press? No. Can I turn at this stage to the Council for the usual housekeeping matters, please?
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everybody. We're not expecting any fire alarms, so if there is an alarm, please make your way to the nearest fire exit and then to the far side of the hotel car park. Toilets are in the corridor outside this room. Please note there are cables attached to the floor, taped to the floor around the room, so please be careful when moving around. If you have a car in the hotel car park, then please ensure you've entered your registration number in the devices at the hotel reception. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Now, these sessions are being recorded for those who are unable to attend or wish to observe proceedings but not be in this room. Those recordings are being uploaded onto the Council's website for people to view at a later stage. But can I ask at this point in proceedings, does anybody else wish to make their own separate recordings of this morning's session? No? Okay, well, we'll do normal introductions shortly, and just remind everybody where you do make a contribution to the discussion to please use microphones so that people can pick up the discussion, particularly on the recording. In terms of this independent examination, I'm assisted in the process by Annette Feeney, the independent programme officer, who's over to my left. Annette is based here while we're having the hearing sessions, so if there's anything you need in terms of documentation or queries about the examination process, please speak to Annette. And if she's not here, otherwise her details are on the examination website. Hopefully everybody's here for the start of discussion on matter 11. This is looking at the infrastructure and transport policies that apply these are the borough-wide policies in the plan, and therefore will apply across the entire borough. We've obviously had discussions at various points around specific sites. I'm keen as part of this session not to reopen too much of that discussion, and we're looking at the kind of effectiveness and consistency with national policy, the justification of the strategic policies, and as I say, the borough-wide policies as they'll apply to all development proposals across the borough in relation to transport and infrastructure. We will need to finish today or sit no later than 12:30, so I appreciate if contributions to the discussion are reasonably concise. And as I've tried to highlight or encourage at earlier sessions, from those who say that the plan is not sound, I need to understand why that should be the case and potentially what needs to be changed or modified in terms of the content of the plan, whether the plan should go forward full stop. Are there any questions, matters people wish to raise, or procedural or process points at this early stage before I get into the agenda? Mr. Green?
Yes, I have some figures from yesterday in relation to the traffic flow on the 194, and it will fit into one of the first points that we will be discussing. This wasn't made available until yesterday, so if okay, I'd like to mention that.
Thank you. Are you able to tell me where these figures have come from and potentially why they're now sort of being
Yeah.
identified at this very late
Yes,
stage?
Yes, I was, informed that they were going to be chased up on the 26th of October by South Tyneside Council, and this was just made available yesterday from Gateshead Council. So we weren't given them, and it applies to A194 because yesterday we did discuss that. There was figures missing, and we've just literally been made available. They've been made available yesterday. And sorry, sir, it does show a massive increase in the traffic on the A194, so it highlights what we were indicating yesterday.
Okay, I mean, I think I've said through my guidance notes for the Stage 2 hearing sessions that once people had prepared their statements, I was not going to accept further evidence or material. I mean, this is a hearing. It's not sort of comparable to a committee meeting, or there is a process to this and a process of fairness. I was mindful when the dates moved from November to January that this might arise, and I repeated again on my notes in terms of the change of dates, no more new material or evidence. I appreciate there may be a timing issue around this, but I think I'm going to take a firm line on this, Mr. Green, because otherwise other people can come to me with other additional material. We are in a sort of a clear sort of process for this.
Yes.
I don't quite understand why this data couldn't have been obtained earlier, and I'm also slightly confused as why Gateshead are providing data in relation to something that's part of the network here in South Tyneside. Mr. Mail.
Thank you, sir. It's just to give a little bit of understanding around the data source Mr. Green's referring to. So Gateshead Council is responsible for a Tyne and Wear Traffic and Accident Data Unit, which is an independent traffic source whereby they've got a range of traffic counters across the network. As to the responsibility for when the traffic count's updated, it's not a responsibility of South Tyneside Council. It primarily lies with Gateshead Council. But this is in addition to other data sources. There's a range of traffic counters on the network that the Department of Transport have got. So again, it's just to provide you with some rationale behind what the data source is really, sir, if that would be of assistance. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, my line is I'm not going to accept into the examination any further material. I'll see where we get to in terms of the discussion today, Mr. Green, and what you refer to. I'm not formally accepting in any further material. Councillor Kilgore?
Yeah, thank you, sir. I think, I very much respect your decision on that. I think when we talked yesterday around vision-led approach and the need to put back in and run back through certain figures with regards to the robust data, and if that is continuing to be run through, which it was mentioned yesterday, I really am delighted actually that it's recorded on YouTube, because the narrative throughout this hearing is really relevant to today in particular. And this data that Mr. Green now has is really relevant to that vision-led approach. And I accept that you're not accepting it into the inquiry, but it is really relevant to the infrastructure along that A194 for SP8. It is absolutely crucial, sir.
Thank you. Well, we'll come back to the A194. There is a reference to it in Policy 51, so when we come on to transport, we can pick it up there. I was just looking around the room. No further contributions on this particular point. I was going to say a few remarks just generally around infrastructure to kind of help set the scene for this morning's session. So I'll do that, and maybe people want to reflect on what I'm going to say, and then where that informs your kind of various contributions. So just in terms of infrastructure, which is the first item on this morning's agenda, and then we'll go on to look at the transport policies for the borough. Infrastructure is often a contentious issue for local plan examinations, and it's often said, the infrastructure cannot cope with the demands arising from development. I think what I'd invite us to all bear in mind is when some of this development is planned to take place. And we discussed yesterday in terms of the housing trajectory, most of it is going to come forward after sort of 4 or 5 years from now. So nothing's, a lot of the growth that the plan is looking at is not going to be happening immediately or straight away. There has to be a proportionate evidence base for plan making, and when we're looking at identifying site allocations, we're not dealing with planning applications and the level of detail that would be needed at the planning application stage. The evidence is for plan making is to inform policy requirements, and a key to that will be the infrastructure delivery plan, which will be the first item we look at. In particular, for developments that are likely to come forward beyond the sort of first 5 years of the plan, so from sort of early 2030s, the tests around infrastructure needed is one of a reasonable prospect. It's not that's a relatively low bar, because I think it has to be accepted in plan making that there is going to be uncertainty. We're looking ahead over 15 years. Not everything is known at this stage. And part of that is because certain aspects of infrastructure are going to be the responsibility of certain infrastructure providers. They work on either 3 or 5 year kind of funding cycles. So they will not be in a position, as we sit here now, to sort of say with certainty what is going to be delivered, particularly towards the later years of the plan. It's also important, and it's a legal embedded in kind of legal tests, that plans address the impact related to their growth. It's not for developments to remedy and address existing deficiencies within infrastructure, although there may be some slight parallels where to unlock growth will require some consideration of where there are existing issues. And then finally, just in terms of the broad sort of strategic picture for infrastructure, planners often refer to something that's known as the presumption in favour of sustainable development, a bit of a technical term, but it's in the National Planning Policy Framework. And for plan making, it says that as a minimum, authorities should be providing for the homes and jobs that are needed, unless the adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. Such a scenario could be, in my view, where we've got a showstopper situation in relation to infrastructure. Now, for the record, as I sit here now, in terms of all the representations I've been through on the plan, I don't have anything from any of the infrastructure providers, whether that's highways, water, education, health, electricity, gas, Nexus, as the public transport, metro, network rail, saying that their networks fundamentally can't cope with the level of growth that's identified in this plan. So I'm coming from it from that perspective. And I'd just say, in terms of looking ahead and going forward, there's often a sort of a chicken and egg dimension to when infrastructure comes forward and when it's kind of potentially could be needed. But I'd say to any local authority, potentially one of the advantages of having an up-to-date local plan is being in that position of providing certainty to infrastructure providers that they know this is where development is likely to take place and we can respond accordingly. So I thought it would just be helpful, just very briefly, to set out some kind of context to this morning's discussion, and perhaps how I might be looking at things as a well-travelled, weary planning inspector. So I'd like to move on then to issue 1 and the infrastructure needed to support sustainable growth. I'd identified at my MIQ 11.1 I think the significance of the infrastructure delivery plan as part of the key evidence base for the plan. I'd just like to invite the Council to just set the scene in terms of the robustness of that work and whether there's anything that potentially needs to kind of change or be reflected through the infrastructure development plan work.
Thank you, sir. Well, in terms of the robustness and validity of the IDP work, there's two sections to the IDP. The overview, which presents a descriptive overview organised thematically. And then there's the infrastructure delivery schedule, which provides a detailed breakdown of the items of infrastructure needed to deliver the local plan, including the estimated time frame for delivery, possible funding sources, and whether the item is critical, essential, or desirable in the context of the policies and allocations in the local plan. In terms of the process for preparing the IDP, it has involved extensive engagement both internally within the council and externally with other stakeholders. Internally, contributors have included the Strategic Transport Manager, the Environmental Protection Team, and the School Places Planning Manager. External contributors have included National Highways, Northumbrian Water, Nexus, and the North East and North Cumbria Integrated Care Board. And this is referenced in the Duty to Cooperate statement in relation to National Highways and Northumbrian Water. And in terms of will the IDP require updating, I think we've already acknowledged through the updated Statement of Common Ground with National Highways that an update is required to reflect the vision-led approach to transport.
Thank you for that. Now, I don't want to interrupt the flow of discussion, but can anybody spot the obvious mistake I did earlier? I haven't invited people to introduce yourselves. So, if I can start on my right, please.
I was feeling a bit aggrieved, I have to say. I'm Paul Shadorevian, King's Counsel, acting for the Council.
I'm Matt Clifford, Senior Planning Policy Officer.
Good morning, sir. My name's Trevor Mail. I'm Strategic Transport Manager at South Tyneside Council.
I'm Jeff Horseman, Team Manager, Development Management at South Tyneside Council.
Vanessa Eggleston from iTransport, representing Laverick Hall Farm, the promoters of the Felgate site.
Bob Latimer, Whitburn.
I'm Steve Lavelle. I'm from Whitburn Neighbourhood Forum.
Good morning, I'm Dave Hutchinson from East Bolton Neighbourhood Forum.
Good morning, Councillor Geraldine Kilgour for the Felgate and Headworth Ward.
Good morning, Dave Green, representing the Save the Felgate Greenbelt Group.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, we'll now return to the discussion. So can I also just understand from the council, I think you've outlined there, Mr. Clifford, that the infrastructure delivery plan, as you say, separates out identified infrastructure as whether it's going to be critical to the delivery of the plan, essential, or something that's going to be desirable to kind of securing overall sustainable development. In terms of those items that are identified as critical, so really kind of highly identified as being required. How was that process undertaken, and are you able to advise me just generally what is identified as being critical? Because obviously not all infrastructure is, but is there any kind of themes that emerge?
Thank you, sir. Well, as you rightly say, the infrastructure is prioritised, critical, essential, desirable. The critical designation is primarily relevant to highways projects, and it's been informed by extensive discussions with the gentleman to my right, Mr. Mail, and also with National Highways, and essentially a view is formed whether it's actually going to be critical to mitigating the delivery of development proposed in the local plan. And obviously, as evidence has changed as we've progressed through the process, what might be considered critical has evolved. And I know there's been different views about that, which you've heard. But that is essentially how that process has worked.
Thank you. As was indicated earlier, in terms of various representations on the plan from other infrastructure providers, and not necessarily identifying sort of fundamental kind of issues, so that's reflected through in terms of the infrastructure delivery plan, in terms of there not being kind of critical projects for things like wastewater or health or other dimensions of infrastructure.
Well, I think with wastewater, I mean, essentially, those are projects which are part of Northumbrian Water's remit. So we can't really ask for contributions for them to do X, Y, or Z. They have provided us with the, they've not objected to the local plan. They have stated that there is the capacity. I think we've already had that discussion. So there aren't sort of actual projects identified in the infrastructure delivery schedule in relation to wastewater. In relation to healthcare, we have liaised with the Integrated Care Board and continue to do so, but there aren't specific projects. It's a bit of a fluid situation to do in relation to primary healthcare provision. So it's difficult to actually say X, Y, or Z will be delivered at such and such a point. The providers are sometimes independent operators, general practices. So they're in a discussion with the ICB about their future plans, etc. And obviously it's quite a sensitive topic.
Thank you, and I will come to others shortly. In terms of, I had to sort of just revise and amend the agenda last week for this item, but just in terms of the general funding landscape, a number of people have made representations on the IDP, so the Infrastructure Delivery Plan. Obviously in the Appendix 2 schedule, where it's got kind of the list of infrastructure, I think where costs are known, they're identified, but that's not always possible. And then the schedule sort of says that there'll be a sort of a look towards either developer contributions or other sort of potential funding sources to deliver or cover the costs of some of this infrastructure. I know the Council's just able to very sort of briefly just advise what potential sort of funding sources could be available in addition to kind of developer contributions to help deliver the plan over the next 14, 15 years.
Well, the IDP provides an overview of funding and delivery, so including the Council's capital programme, developer contributions, as you mentioned, Section 278 agreements, and potential sources of external capital funding. So in addition to the topic areas of the IDP, there's a section, in each of the topic areas, there's a section on plan provision and funding. And in addition to the sources listed in the IDP, there's also the National Highways Road Investment Strategy. Although the draft RIS 3, covering the period 2025 to 2030, is fully committed, there's potential for funding from a future RIS during the plan period. Two recent sources of funding, not necessarily local plan specific, but demonstrate that the Council has been able to obtain external funding. MHCLG Local Growth Fund, which will start in April 2026 and which replaces the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. And planned investment in Jarrow, £20 million over 10 years starting in April 2026 and Biddick Hall starting in spring 2027. So those are around sort of community projects. So there are external sources. Obviously, we can't look forward over the whole plan period. Funding sources change, but I think the council has been quite successful in shown it has the ability to obtain successfully external sources of funding. And I think in stage 1 hearings, Mr. Finch made the point that this authority has a successful record in terms of securing external funding for and working in partnership with National Highways to deliver strategic infrastructure. Notwithstanding the point Mr. Finch has made that there isn't funding available at the moment because of National Highways funding situation.
Thank you. Mr. Mail, please.
Thank you, sir. I was just going to add some context in addition to Mr. Clifford. I think it's worthwhile to reference that the North East Combined Authority has got a significant amount of devolved funding powers now in terms of transport. The council has, over the years, managed to secure significant amounts of investment, whether that be active travel funding through Active Travel England, and as well as funding through the Sustainable Transport Fund, as well as in the impending Transport for City Regions investment. I think it was touched upon by Councillor Kilgour yesterday. I think from the period of 2027 to 2032, it's expected that the region, as in the North East, will receive close to £2 billion over a 5-year period. And whilst there is long-standing commitments, for example, the Washington Loop, which will be a metro extension, there is an opportunity for local authorities to bid in for significant investment around sort of strategic points on the highway network. But that said, also public transport improvements as well as sustainable transport improvements. So just to give you some further context. And I think just to reiterate the point that Mr. Clifford made, we do have a really strong track record for where we identify schemes, we secure the investment, and we deliver on that investment, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll do a final point for the council, and then I'm going to bring in people who are on my left. So in terms of my agenda, I think it's been referred to already in relation to the National Highways situation. My point or question is whether it would be necessary to update the infrastructure delivery plan to help inform or support any consultation on proposed modifications.
I think the answer to that is unequivocally yes, to reflect a change in the requirement which is currently set out in the IDP and will involve a change also to Schedule 2 to bring it up to date.
Thank you. I've made a note of that and we'll come back to that as part of a final administrative session, so I can just understand how everything will come together going forward. But I've made a note of that. Thank you. Okay, I'll now turn to others on my left. I'll start with Councillor Kilgour. I'll also maybe invite Mr. Green as well, because I know from your statement you were querying whether all of this will be deliverable. And then I'm going to, as part of this round, invite Mr. Lavelle in terms of your submission and statements. In terms of identified earlier, there's no kind of critical infrastructure identified in relation to wastewater. I think you've got a different view or position on that, so I'll come to you and possibly Mr. Latimer as well on that point. So I'll start with Councillor Kilgour first, please.
Thank you, sir. Mine isn't so much around the detail of the infrastructure at this particular point, but it is to come back around the funding. So I'm fortunate enough to sit on the Jarrow Forward board, and it is around initiatives for particularly young people in our community and actually bringing forward events or structures in place to encourage people coming into the borough, and for those in the borough it is very much limited to, I think, the NE32 postcode. So I wouldn't envisage from what I've read and been involved in at length that would cover any infrastructure costs at all. It's more around tangible things in situ for our communities to benefit from by way of grants, etc., which is currently underway. So I really am very cautious around suggesting that this might be available and that might be available. That is not what that's for, and it's very clear on the government website as well. And I think when we're looking at other funding per se, without any guarantee of that or any real structure around what is available, I don't think that we can make any assumptions. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Green, please.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, thank you, sir. So, I know we discussed yesterday all the funding requirements. There's a lot of critical infrastructure, required around the local road network. But I think, that some of it was classed as desirable with the new figures we have. It may be approaching the critical, and this may be a time to mention the figures. It's dramatically increased on the A194 alone by by 5,300 vehicles a day. And if this information had been made available on Tuesday, I would have mentioned it then. But that then brings into it the Mill Lane roundabout, which is desirable, but putting now that we know that much traffic is actually on the road network, then it does become critical. You've also got the A185 on here, which is Hebben. That's critical. That's another 750,000, and it's all building up. The Mill Lane approach road too, that Lavricks are going to take off the new developments on the Mill Lane. Again, that's desirable. But it's now that we know the true figures, it become, in my opinion, it should be relooked at. It should be, some of it should be designated critical. And I think that's a failing in the local plan. And again, I think there can be no build on the Felgate Greenbelt until these figures are put right with accurate data. Because otherwise, what's going to happen is houses are going to be built. The infrastructure is not going to be there, although it's promised. The funding's not going to be there, possibly. So the houses are there, and I cannot see, the chance of the council then National Highways turning around to Lavricks and saying, well, we're not going to let anybody in until you put the infrastructure, because that would be another 5-10 years. And I think it seriously needs to be looked at, because it's essential to the local residents that it's put right. Because bear in mind also that there's going to be an approach road going onto the 20-mile-an-hour road around Felgate itself, which then brings into the Felgate Avenue junction with Monkton Lane, because figures there you have got in an appendix, there was something like 7,000 to 8,000 a day just going through that junction alone. Now at that junction there's a single lane metro bridge which brings the whole area to a standstill. You have got all the pictures. They were on my appendices. And the whole situation, you cannot put a housing development of this size on that with the current data that's we're being given, and that indicates that it is seriously flawed, sir, and I don't think they can go ahead with SP8 on the current figures. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. I'm just looking at the latest infrastructure delivery plan. So again, so too site specific, but just for my note and record, the Mill Lane roundabout improvements I see are identified as essential rather than desirable, and that's on page 63 of that appendix. So I've made a note of that. Just in response to what I've heard from Mr. Green, before I bring in Ms. Eggleston, the council's indicated that it will look at the IDP in relation to some specific issues, and that will be available to kind of inform the main modification consultation. I mean, more generally, as data, data and information invariably changes all the time. We get things, just this point about the infrastructure delivery plan being a living document, and maybe inviting the council to just explain what that could mean, and the kind of potential changes going forward.
clearly some of the assumptions made now, based on the available data, will change over time, or may change over time. The IDP is an essential foundation for the plan in many respects. And bearing in mind also that it will inform decision making and the requirement for Section 106 contributions, or the imposition of, for example, Grampian conditions, there is a need to keep this under review, having regard to information that is available from those who have already been consulted in relation to this and whose work is inputted into the outcomes. So that will be done. In that respect, it might be appropriate to identify that review process in the plan itself, so people understand that it's continually under review. Assessments have to be made at a point in time. What we can't do through this examination is undertake further reviews of the assumptions made there. And in relation to highways, unless there's something quite critical, obviously, which draws a question mark over whether or not this is correct. In relation to highways, the national highways, the modelling has been done and the predictions have been made on the basis of what National Highways and our consultant Cisco believe to be the relevant and up-to-date data. Quite clearly, there may be other data sets used for other purposes which have different outcomes, but they would need to be interrogated to understand if there are differences, why those differences exist, and it could be due to the monitoring. And of course, the purpose of that data collection also needs to be understood. So it would be misguided, as it were, to start comparing one set of data with another when you have at your disposal the findings of a reputable consultant and government's own executive agency dealing with some very, very important critical infrastructure provision.
Thank you. I've just reminded myself, I think paragraph 14.7 of the plan refers to the IDP being reviewed. So there's a reference, yeah. Okay. Mr. Mayle, please.
Yeah, I was just going to add some context further. So I think in terms of the road network as it stands today, we need to be considerate to the fact that there's regionally significant events proceeding outside of South Tyneside Council. Namely, there's major roadworks on the A1. There is Tynesbridge maintenance works, which has actually restricted the Tynesbridge down to single lane traffic in both directions. That will all have a consequence on how traffic moves around in the northeast. Because of the restrictions around the Tynesbridge and indeed the clean air zone that's been instructed across the Tynesbridge, there will be expectations of fluctuations in traffic where motorists resort to finding different routes. So again, it's just to provide some additional narrative that there will be regionally significant events that affect the road network. But as a council, and added to what was recalled earlier, we are content that our evidence that's been submitted is robust. So thanks.
Before I come back to others, I will hear from Ms Eggleston next, please.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to reference a couple of points that in terms of the Council's response to AP12, the questions that you posed after the first sessions. The updated work that's been done by the Council and has been reviewed by National Highways undertook two elements. The first was to provide clarification to National Highways that the traffic data that had been used in the original assessments, which were based on 2022 data, were representative of current conditions, and one of the supporting documents in that AP12 response did present that comparison of traffic flows between 2022 and 2024 and proved that the baseline model that had been used was still robust and representative of current conditions. So that provides an update in terms of making sure that the most appropriate up-to-date data has been used. And then the second element was in relation to the vision-led assessment, which actually dealt with the traffic forecasts associated with the proposed local plan developments, and that looked at changes in policy in terms of promoting sustainable transport and what impact that has already and will have on travel movements moving forward in terms of increased working from home, increased use of sustainable transport and things. And it's that combination of assessments that have been undertaken in the work that was done through the summer, which has then led to these changes in the infrastructure package, which are now reflected in the proposed changes to the schemes that are identified in the IDP. So notwithstanding what Mr Green said about some data that he's received in the last few days, I think certainly from our perspective, we think that the work that the Council and National Highways have done over the last few months in ensuring that the data that they've got and that they've presented and used as the basis for the assessments has been done properly and is a robust basis.
Thank you. Who wants to come in as Councillor Kilgour first and then Mr Green?
Please, sir. I completely refute that. I think that the data that we received yesterday was from a senior highways officer in Gateshead Council. So it's information that they've collected and worked with South Tyneside on, and that data is used to formulate the information that we act upon. The data that has been collected, that has been referred to around 2022, is not adequate for the purposes of today or the local plan moving forward. I think the data that we're referring to in 2022 absolutely would be valid and has been used. It's not accurate, it's not up to date, it's not relevant, and this is what we need to be looking at. And what I really want to say is that on reflection of yesterday, I went home and in between a very brief interlude of going to Borough Council, I looked at the YouTube videos of last hearing. So I would point members around the table, including Mr Shadaravian and Ms Eggleston there, around the meeting on the 15th of July, around 3:58 into the meeting, I think in the afternoon, and 4:29 as well. That whole session refers to the infrastructure and the likelihood of funding. And I know, Ms Eggleston, you did come back to me yesterday around the provision. You clearly say the provider, the developer, will pay for the arm into the development, and a proportionate contribution, which was 40 million that we were talking about at the last hearing, towards the progression of this. Now, I'm really concerned that I'm hearing different communications around the need for a master plan, the need for this IDP to be absolutely up to date. Of course it does, because the plan is not sound unless it is, and also an SPD around SP8. Now, there's been a massive, scary shift between the view and the direction of King's Council at session 1 to today and to yesterday, and I am deeply disturbed as a member of the council to hear the shift in the narrative between then and now. What has happened? What has been discussed that members of this local authority are not aware of? Who has the power to make those decisions? And the information that I would urge you, sir, to rely upon is in those YouTube videos. It is stark.
Thank you. I wouldn't use the word power, but it rests with me to determine whether main modifications are necessary to the plan in order to make it sound. I'm hearing the submissions, I've heard the position from the council yesterday and from others, but it will still rest with me as to whether I think that's necessary for the tests of soundness. So I'll leave it at that for this moment in time. Mr. Green, please.
Yes, just going back to what Mr. Mail said in relation to the Tyne Bridge works, that would actually make people actually put less traffic on the road, because there's a Felgate, there's a metro station. There's no way that, you know, cars would head up the A194 into Newcastle, sir. So I question that. I wouldn't travel to Newcastle if the Tyne Bridge is getting, you know, a lot of work done on it. But sir, this is fresher data, and it is real, it is facts. Lives will be put at risk, and the residents within this area live it on a daily basis. They cannot build it, and well sir, you know how many residents throughout Reg 19, and you know there's more recent with in AIA that Lavrix had put in where 315 objected to it, even though they weren't accepted. Many hundreds have raised this, and it's SPM cannot go ahead until this is all reviewed, because it's a danger to life, it's a danger to the residents who live not only in and around Felgate, but who live in and around the whole area, sir.
Thank you. Before I move off from hearing from the community and potentially bringing in others, I mean, is there anything that's kind of missing from the infrastructure delivery plan in terms of specific schemes? Or is it just a concern about the deliverability of what's been identified?
Yeah, so I think deliverability, I don't think anyone would disagree with the fact that the design needs to be input. It's been in need for years, let alone with a potential development of 1,200 homes on SP8. However, I don't believe it is deliverable. I don't believe the commitments around the table are solid, or indeed will come forward. But equally, the £40 million scheme that has been discussed, and that is discussed on the 15th of July, is absolutely what is necessary. And I think that the headings, as Mr Green has quite eloquently said, the kind of parameters, the red, amber, green, if you like, it's critical. It cannot progress. It is fundamentally flawed without those being in place in advance of even suggesting a development on SP8. None of the other developments in that locality, one of them for 115 houses, and I mentioned yesterday on the college or the old college site, there is no intention for a contribution to highways infrastructure. The contribution there is looking at plain pitch strategy. So we're kidding ourselves if we're thinking that this developer, that developer, this is the main developer. Townend Farm is not in our sphere for that particular development there and that infrastructure there. So I would really urge that, you know, the plan alone is rendered flawed on that very basis. Thank you.
Sir, can I? Yeah, very brief, sir. I think something missing from here as well is the actual access road from the development onto Durham Drive, sir, because that's got to be critical, and it needs to be, you know, you're talking about an access road that goes onto a 20-mile-an-hour residential road with 17 sets of speed humps, 3 schools in the local vicinity, and a successful gymnastics centre. And it doesn't appear in this.
There are 2 exits.
And to be quite honest, you know, well, one stuff added, but one stuff removed. But that access road, in my opinion, should never go ahead. It's onto a residential 20-mile-an-hour road.
Thank you. We sort of appreciate its issues kind of cross over from stage 1. Is there anything further from either Miss Eggleston or the council in terms of what I've heard? No. Okay. Noted. I think at this stage then I'll turn to Mr. Lavelle, please. Different topic, different location, but obviously I've got your Matter 11 statement, and there's an appendix from work undertaken by Professor Hammond.
That's correct, sir. Professor Peter Hammond, I've spoken to him. He's an accepted sort of source of knowledge about wastewater management.
Just to help me understand a little bit more about that appendix that you've provided, is he a sort of local resident or somebody who's a hydrologist or somebody who's just...
He's I understand he's an academic, a professor from Cambridge University who lives way down south, as far as I'm concerned. And he he's actually part of a group, Wasp. So
Wasp.
he lives on the River
The River Windrush.
Windrush,
Yeah.
which is like an epicentre of wastewater problems where the wildlife and the marine life is decimated. So he does sort of deep diving into, uses artificial intelligence, deep diving into data, etc. And so the report he produced for me, very kindly, in fact corroborated later findings by Ofwat of dry weather spills at Hendon Waste. It wasn't accepted by the council, but it was accepted by Ofwat, etc.
Thank you. And in terms of your response to my sort of massive issues and questions around infrastructure that's needed during the plan period, as I think I've highlighted earlier, Council can correct me if I'm wrong, there's nothing in the infrastructure development plan in terms of necessary upgrades or additional capacity in wastewater treatment works. Obviously the Council has engaged with Northumbrian Water, which they're encouraged, required to do. But I think you want me to take an alternative view in relation particularly to the Hendon wastewater treatment works.
Yes, at the Hendon and Whitburn, where we live, sort of thing. You know, I presented on Wednesday on matter 9 about water quality. Obviously, that's intrinsically linked to matter 11, which is the infrastructure needed in terms of sewage to provide the water quality in terms of sewage treatment. There'll be some crossover to Wednesday when I speak today. I think it's necessary to support. I'm going to support proposed amendments to policy wording. You know, I'm the Vice Chair of Whitburn Neighbourhood Forum, been going for about 10 years now. For the benefit of the public, I'd like to explain some background information to put into context what I hope to achieve at this local plan examination. Maybe I should have mentioned it the other day. The volumes of untreated sewage discharged at Whitburn have got progressively worse since the construction of the storm overflow system in 1996. There was over 1 million tonnes of sewage discharged to Whitburn in 2023. The Whitburn Forum created a neighbourhood plan for Whitburn, and one of the policies in the plan aims to protect the neighbourhood area from such large volumes of sewage pollution. Since the neighbourhood plan was made, the council have decided that they do not support our sewage policy. The Forum are disappointed in the council's position as the sewage policy in the neighbourhood plan was not as stringent as we wanted, but we were advised that neighbourhood plans are extremely constrained in being able to address issues this strategic. When our neighbourhood plan went through an examination process similar to this one, we were advised that the neighbourhood plan, due to the constraints of what neighbourhood plans can and cannot influence, will not be able to solve the problem as a whole, and therefore the Forum can and should continue to seek to influence the Environment Agency, Northumbrian Water and South Tyneside policies. I'm here today to challenge Policy 59, delivering infrastructure, as it relies on evidence in the Infrastructure Delivery Plan. The IDP refers to Northumbrian Water Drainage and Wastewater Management Plan, DWMP, of June 2022, and the current Asset Management Plan, AMP7, for Northumbrian Water, covering the period April 2020 to March 2025. Obviously outside of March 2025, and the AMP8 is yet to be published. Both plans are outdated, making the IDP inadequate. I'm also here to support, believe it or not, SB25, infrastructure, but I would again request an amendment that independent and verifiable evidence is obtained to identify any deficiencies in existing provision and to ensure the sewage infrastructure required to support new development is delivered as an integral part of the development at the appropriate stage. And where improvements are required to the sewerage network to comply with the urban wastewater treatment regulations, the LPA will look at potential for phased development and use a Grampian condition to ensure development comes forward in line with the required upgrades. It was agreed at the examination on Wednesday that the local planning authority are not obliged in law to defer to the advice of the sewage undertaker. An LPA is not prevented from investigating any potential failures that may exist if circumstances compel it to do so. At the regulation stage, which is the last time Northumbrian Water were consulted, Northumbrian Water declared that there are no capacity issues at Hendon and Howden wastewater treatment works, and as they do not exceed dry weather flow compliance. I'll touch upon dry weather flow. Since then, circumstances have changed with the Ofwat decision notice published in June 2025, which concluded that Northumbrian Water had breached environmental law. Northumbrian Water did not contest the findings of Ofwat, but agreed a number of undertakings, including agreeing a plan to review the capacity of and minimise environmental harm from the Whitburn Hendon system. By agreeing to these undertakings, Northumbrian Water has avoided a criminal prosecution in the Magistrates' Court, where the directors and managers, if found guilty, could face a fine, imprisonment, or both, much like the criminal prosecutions brought against fly tippers. Northumbrian Water were obliged to deliver the plan by December 8th, 2025, but have failed to do so. On Wednesday, there was an argument put forward on behalf of the Council that the regulatory regime around wastewater is extremely complex, and it requires not just an understanding of the current situation, but also on capacity requirements for future needs. It was suggested that it would not be appropriate to impose any further level of scrutiny, as that would impose a positive obligation on the local planning authority to assess capacity and performance of the undertaker sewage infrastructure each time it considers an application for permission in relation to a major proposed development. Much like the requirement for rigorous analysis in the Whitburn Neighbourhood Plan that the Council now rejects. Mr. Latimer has an engineering background, but neither of us hold any qualifications or training in planning for wastewater management, yet, as normal residents of Whitburn, we both have an understanding of the current situation and also on capacity requirements for future needs. Our understanding of the current situation is that, 1, Northumbrian Water do not have the capacity to collect and treat wastewater in the Hendon Whitburn sewage system to conform to the urban wastewater treatment regulations. Secondly, the capacity requirements for future need requires improvements in the local sewage system. Understanding the current situation is not complex. The LPA has all the skills and technical knowledge needed to come to any verifiable decision that is not based upon assurances from the undertaker itself. As an example of one simple way to assess present capacity and performance of the sewage infrastructure, I suggest the LPA investigate what is the current dry weather flow in the Whitburn sewer system and compare this WDF with the dry weather flow that the system was designed to operate at when constructed. This can be determined by obtaining data from Northumbrian Water, which is readily available, such as the population served for each sewage pumping station. Data regarding the flows generated in the sewage system in dry weather can be used in conjunction to onward pumping capacity flow rates for the pumping station to determine at what dry weather flow multiple the system is currently spilling. This can give an indication of the current performance of the system. The Environment Agency can provide support with the discharge permit conditions as appropriate. I've got such data, and I can say that the storm overflow system at Whitburn was designed and constructed to pass forward flows up to 6 times dry weather flow. It's calculated on the water usage of a population equivalent in 1999 of 35,000 people before it discharged into the environment. In 2014, Northumbrian Water, as part of the response to the 2012 European Court judgment, revised the population of the catchment area to 56,000, as per their 2014 business plan, submitted to DEFRA, as mentioned on Wednesday by Mr. Latimer. In response to an environmental information request, Northumbrian Water has recently disclosed that the Whitburn sewage catchment area now serves a catchment area population of over 100,000 people. That is almost 3 times the population it was designed for. Based on the data supplied by Northumbrian Water, we have calculated that the Whitburn system now discharges untreated sewage into the environment when flows reach a level that is less than 3 times what is currently the dry weather flow. Similarly, we have reached the conclusion that the pumping station at St Peter's, responsible for forwarding flows over the Weymouth Bridge to Hendon Sewage Treatment Works, is discharging to the environment at less than 2.5 times dry weather flow. The discharges of sewage into the sea at Whitburn and the bottleneck scenario that exists at St Peter's pumping station will become worse as this plant stands unless improvements are made to the sewage system. In line with the Ofwat report, the sewage system at Whitburn has now become unfit for purpose with respect to the urban wastewater treatment regulations, as it takes very little rainfall for the Whitburn system to discharge untreated sewage into the environment. It's not particularly time-consuming to obtain this data and investigate any potential failures that may exist, and either verify or refute our assessment. Such an investigation could also be used to identify any deficiencies in existing provision and inform any action plan needed to ensure the sewage infrastructure required to support new development is delivered or planned to be delivered by Northumbrian Water as an integral part of the development at the appropriate stage in line with policy SP 25. I believe it's reasonable to expect that the scale and pace of new development will be dependent on sufficient capacity being available in existing infrastructure to meet the demands of new development. Where this cannot be demonstrated, permission for new development will only be through the provision of new infrastructure. Again, I suggest that where improvements are required to the sewage network to comply with the urban wastewater treatment regulations, the LPA will look at potential for phased development and use a granting condition to ensure development comes forward in line with required upgrades. Those are my submissions, sir.
Thank you for that. Is there anything further you wish to add, Mr. Latimer, to what I've heard from Mr. Lavelle?
I'm going to add a lot, yeah. I want to say first, what I picked up from Wednesday meeting was that Mr. Spencer's constant reference to the word rigorous. This was the word used in the Whitburn neighbourhood sewerage policy. I resigned from the forum because, having dealt with NWL in the EA for many years, I was aware that this word or action was never going to be strong enough in determining whether the sewerage infrastructure had the capacity needed. The forum disagreed. I would like to just say one little thing, going off the subject a little bit, is that I think it's important to mention, because it appears, you know, I live in South Tyneside. These are the people that are supposed to look after me in South Tyneside, and I just cannot understand why they can't see that there's something seriously wrong with the sewage system in South Tyneside. I think it's important to mention, because this inquiry relates to all of South Tyneside. When I tell you back in 1831, Sunderland was the site of the first outbreak of cholera. It was claimed it arrived from ships from the Baltic and their unsanitary conditions. The evidence I provide shows these unsanitary conditions are returned. Although my main concern is Whitburn, these unsanitary conditions apply to all of South Tyneside. The sewerage infrastructure has gone past the point of being safe for people's health and has even been reported as making dogs ill when they swim in the sea, which is now being investigated. I refer to the Water Resources Management Report. The report highlights the flaws in relying on information provided by NWL. And I have to add that NWL has been totally, what's the word?
Useless?
Useless, no. Worse than useless, by Ofwat. And on point 7.3, NW has a duty to develop and maintain an efficient supply and treatment. The Ofwat report I have seen suggests NWL have not only neglected their duty, they've totally failed. We must not ignore this report. 7.7. The presence of surface water, which does not require treatment, limits the ability of the wastewater treatment works to accept additional foul flows from new developments. I think this statement answers the question, but I will provide evidence by way of Sunderland lead local plan authority when he states 2 surface water removal schemes alone have reduced the flows by 400 litres entering the combined sewage system, with the surface water flow now going into Cutthroat Dean. And yet the EU wrote, that was in 2019 when they did that, to try and upgrade the system, the Whitburn system. The EU wrote on the 18th of May 2021, the UK authorities provided a further update in regard to the situation at Whitburn Longsea outfall. They explained that the final data for 2019 showed that 760,000 of wastewater had been discharged. This shows the removal of the surface water has not made a difference at all. In fact, it has made the system worse. The 2023 discharge records show that over 1 million cubic metres of sewage was discharged. They've made the system even worse. Now, what they've done in the upgrade, instead of putting in the 10,000 cubic metres that was necessary, they put a little 3,000 cubic metres in the Seaburn system. Now, what's happening is that that's affecting the dry weather flow.
Mr. Latimer, I'm going to interrupt here. I don't like to do this, but I'm hearing, I think, what you told me at the stage 1 hearings back in July, if my memory serves. What I'm trying to get to, I appreciate there is a very long history to this. There's been a lot of effort from the local community, people in the local community, in terms of identifying various issues. It has resulted in various outcomes in the European courts. I've got that in front of me. Now I've got the Ofwat undertaking as well. Office of Environmental Protection rulings have also cross-referred to the Whitburn situation. I think going forward, I need to understand what needs to change or be amended to the plan. Is your view is it as Mr. Lavelle has suggested and identified, or are you saying no, we need something further based on your evidence?
Well, I think I would like to complete it, so then that would be then come clear what is needed. I mean, we've heard there they're relying on Northumbrian Water. If you're not going to allow me to rebut that, and you know, I mean, I've got, well, it's up to you, but I mean, I've even got things where I actually went into the reports last night, and it didn't rain yesterday, but there was discharges being made. Now, to me, that's very important. And I would like to, I haven't got much more, but I would like to complete it.
Thank you. If on completing that statement, again, as I said, I want to understand what needs to change.
You'll understand.
Thank you.
I quote further from the so-called surface water removal that during 2015, which is in the resources management, during 2015-2020, NW delivered a number of agreed surface water separation schemes were designed to relieve the volume of flows entering Howding. The volumes of sewage spilling along the length of the River Don, the Wagonway at Hebburn, Glasshouse Street, show beyond doubt that Howden does not have the capacity to cope the records for South Shields Interceptor pumping station show that 94 discharges have taken place since the 15th of October. As for Hendon, following the 2001 public inquiry, the Secretary of State accepted the inspector's recommendations, and the inspector went to great lengths to explain the measuring of the overflow, the measuring of the flows arriving at the pumping station, at the Hendon Treatment Works, but they never ever measured it. What is not mentioned is that the pump, that was it. At the public inquiry, NWL gave up with a plan for returning flows back to the foul sewer. This has now got to a level of 300,000 cubic metres entering in the foul sewer that was never accounted for. So I think that's very important. If you're saying, you know, you've heard that, and we can add even more. At the present time, the EU said the system had to be upgraded by 2017. Ofwat's now sent me this, the delivery plan. The Environment Agency said the plan has been delivered, and now we find that there's a penalty clause in the plan, and if it wasn't delivered, the people of Whitburn are entitled to a $4 million refund. So at the moment, Ofwat's looking at that. So I think it's very important that this doesn't go any further anymore until we get the action plan from Ofwat. European Court of Justice stated that wastewater should not be discharged as a matter of course when there weren't extreme cases. The whole sewerage infrastructure does not have the capacity to cope because the Whitburn and Hendon system is designed using, which Mr. Lavelle has referred to, is incorrect population figures. And it wasn't Ofwat that found out that the population was wrong. It was me that found out that the population was wrong. And in the first place, it was the council that provided the population figures for 35,000. So yous have the figures. And if you look what Ofwat's saying now, they're trying to put 56,000 into a system designed for 35,000. And although I'm old, the old saying is still true: you cannot put a quart into a pint pot. If the existing infrastructure is full, then you cannot keep putting more in. Ofwat have totally discredited NWL and the EA's ability to measure and maintain their sewerage system, yet the local planning authority are still relying on their words. Even the most basic analysis would find that the sewerage system is inadequate and not fit for purpose. Although my concern is the sewage flows from Whitburn, at 8 p.m. last night I looked at the Tyneside Interceptor sewerage map. It showed that this CSO was discharging at the River Don. As far as I was aware, there was no rain yesterday, let alone a storm. If this local plan examination finds that Policy 25 depends only on the infrastructure delivery plan, which totally depends on NWL, and it continues before Ofwat provides the action plan, then the local plan cannot be considered sound. To add more sewerage from further housing development would not only be illegally breaking the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, it would also lead to even greater damage to the environment. So my say is that this plan shouldn't proceed until we've seen the action plan.
Okay, thank you for that clear. Thank you, Mr. Latimer, on what you're advising. Mr. Green, very briefly, please.
Yes, it's just an apology, sir. I mentioned that Durham Drive wasn't, the road wasn't on the IDP, but it actually is. It's on page 92. And it says section 106 and section 278, which will be highways to pay for it, but according to highways yesterday, they weren't paying for anything.
Thank you. I appreciate Durham Drive is local highway the strategic road network. I've heard from Mr Lavelle and Mr Latimer. I think Mr Lavelle's position is similar to what he was advocating for policy 10. Obviously heard, Mr Chadderovian, your submissions in respect of that sort of policy approach in relation to policy 10, and I'm not anticipating you're going to advise me differently in terms of policy 25. The only point I would pick up, or would like to give the council the opportunity to respond to, is Mr Lavelle's submissions that it's not onerous or difficult or complex to do the analysis if it was a rigorous analysis or an alternative analysis.
I personally don't have the means by which to respond to that. However, we have to rely upon the expertise of the water undertaker. We don't have that expertise in-house. We're not an undertaker in that respect. What we can do, however, is make sure we consult with Northumbrian Water, particularly in relation to major allocations. And if the response is unsatisfactory, then of course we will be alerted as to whether or not there will be a need to impose conditions on the grant of planning permission, for example, to restrict occupation until such time as a satisfactory answer or outcome is achieved. I can't say more than that. I mean, I have been through this at some length already, and I understand the case being put, but we have to be, as it were, led by statutory requirements and on the understanding that statutory undertakers will comply with the law. And we've got reasonably up-to-date findings in relation to that, and Northumbrian Water have been thoroughly chastised through that process and have given undertakings, and Ofwat also under the cosh of a further agency have dealt with that and have responded to it, and now we're awaiting the outcome of the action plan. So we must assume for the moment that due process is now being undertaken and will be complied with.
Thank you. Mr Horseman for the council, please.
Yes, so I think just to add a little further to what has just been said, just in the context of the need or otherwise for kind of infrastructure provision. I think in terms of the issues around this term rigorous analysis, certainly our experience in terms of handling kind of major sort of planning applications has been that there are different interpretations of what amounts to rigorous analysis, and one of the cases that has been discussed during the sort of hearing has been the Whitburn Lodge sort of scheme, and certainly with that particular planning application, in handling the planning application, there was a lot of information provided to the council by Northumbrian Water, by Whitburn Neighbourhood Forum. That was scrutinised in a lot of detail by officers, and certainly the view of officers was that we had undertaken a rigorous analysis, but clearly the forum had a different opinion on that matter. So I think, as I say, that the term itself is clearly open to interpretation and different interpretations in terms of what is rigorous and what sort of isn't. I think in terms of issues around infrastructure provision to do with kind of wastewater, clearly there are the two dimensions, kind of treatment capacity and network capacity. Again, just based on major planning applications that we've handled, the evidence that we've been provided with by Northumbrian Water in terms of treatment capacity is that it in terms of the Whitburn-Hendon system, in terms of Hendon sewage treatment works, as I mentioned at the stage 1 hearings, the evidence we were presented with by Northumbrian Water is that there is plentiful treatment capacity at Hendon Sewage Treatment Works, a considerable amount of sort of headroom. I think the figure that was mentioned in the stage 1 hearings was headroom of in the order of yes, it was you were talking about well over 30,000 dwellings, headroom in terms of Hendon Sewage Treatment Works. I think close to 38,000 dwellings, kind of headroom. In terms of the issues around network capacity, so when we're looking at CSO discharges and what have you, again, I think I would just reiterate what I said at the stage 1 hearings, is that is a complex picture. We're not just considering issues around hydraulic capacity, but we're considering issues around the operation of the system, around Northumbrian Water's maintenance of the system, the behaviour of consumers in terms of blockages and what have you, and how those are kind of dealt with by Northumbrian Water. I think in Mr Lavell's evidence on this particular matter, a reference has been made to the work of Professor Hammond, which talks about the matter of flow-to-full treatment, which is the amount of, I understand, the amount of discharge that Northumbrian Water should be passing through their sewage works in kind of wet weather conditions, and as I say, allegations that the sewage works aren't being used to their full capacity in those types of conditions. But again, I think our view would be that's essentially an operational matter. It's not a matter for this particular plan in terms of the assessment of capacity. The capacity is there, is what we've been told by Northumbrian Water. Issues of whether or not they're passing through sufficient discharge at the sewage treatment works in line with the capacity that's there are essentially operational matters for the water company and not matters for this local plan. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I was going to bring that to a conclusion, but Mr Latimer, very briefly.
I hear what Mr Horseman says about relying on Northumbrian Water. All I can say is that it's over 30 years ago now I started dealing with Northumbrian Water. They came to see me because they wanted to build the pumping station next to us. They said to us, we estimate it'll discharge 225,000 a year. That would be the maximum it would discharge. In 2023, it discharged 1 million tonnes. There would be no return flows. In 2023, it returned 300,000 tonnes. So that's how far it's out of sync from what they've done. Now, the other thing is that the European Court was told in the case was between 2005 and 2008. Now, in 2005, it discharged 540,000 tonne. With the rainfall was about 693 millimetre. In 2023, 2024, it discharged 944,000 tonnes from 703 millimetre. A half an inch more of surface water resulted in 500,000 tonne. Now, if Mr Horseman doesn't, he's not even listening to us, I mean, what more can I do? I'm just a member of the public. We've got nobody here to say, look, what you're saying is wrong. So,
Thank you, and I understand that's why you're recommending to me to wait for the report, take a precautionary approach in terms of when development should come forward, and then as part of that, Mr Lavell's suggestions around in terms of modified wording to judge development proposals when they come forward. Very briefly, Mr Lavell, before I move on.
Yeah, just touching on what Mr Horseman said again, he's put total reliance on what the insurances that Northumbrian Water give, at the stage 1 proceedings, you know, and it goes back to the fact that those assurances were at the Regulation 19 stage, and things have moved on since then. We've got the Ofwat report. I put a complaint into the precursor of the OEP back in 2021 that the Environment Agency weren't regulating the permits at Hendon and Whitburn. Obviously, the OEP took over from the IEGCS, I think it was, and they used that information and information from Mr Latimer to reach their findings, which are published in December. So we've got a long history of Northumberland Water, who want a statutory consultee. They're just a private firm looking for profit, making millions of pounds every year to feed their billionaire Chinese owner. As far as I'm concerned, where the local plan is not sound, because it hasn't taken into regard the updates of the OEP, the Ofwat, etc. And you know, you can't regard the ITP as being sound because it relies on outdated information. That's all. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, it's coming up to 5 to 11. What I'm going to suggest we do is take a mid-morning adjournment, come back at 10 past 11. We've got a bit more to discuss on infrastructure. But for the benefit of Mr Lavelle and Mr Latimer, I'm not returning to the wastewater issue. So if you wanted to leave at this point, thank you for your contributions this morning.
Thank you, sir. It's appreciated. The early louses this year. Thank you.
Can I just say one more thing? In the plan, you refer to something about from 2015 to 2020. And I would like to say something about that, because now we'll find from Ofwat that Northumbrian Water was allocated a huge amount of money to put the systems right. And what we find now from Ofwat, and Ofwat's investigating this now, is that they underspent 277 million. And they're being allowed to keep half of that 277 million, and the other half should go back to the people of South Tyneside. Now, I haven't had any money back, but I mean, that's irrelevant. But it's the 277 million to underspend when the system's in such a state. You know, it's just, we're on our own. We don't seem to have any regulators or anything to look after us. We're having to put our case forward, and you know, really this is not even the real place to put it, but we can't, you know, you do an EI out of Northumbrian Water and they just fob you off, and same with the Environment Agency and same with the Council. So thank you for listening to us.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take the mid-morning adjournment. I still want to be back in this room at 10 past 11, please, everybody. Thank you. Okay, it's just gone 11:10, so I'm going to resume this discussion into matter 11. We're on to the next item on the agenda, and it relates to my MIQ 11.2, and it's the issue about, I appreciate this is a strategic policy at part of a strategic policy SP25, but whether the first part of the policy is seeking developments to improve deficiencies in existing infrastructure provision, and whether that would be justified and consistent with national policy. Briefly invite the council, please.
Yes, sir, we consider it would be justified and consistent with national policy. I think it's important to point out that this would only be the case where the deficiency in existing policy, in existing provision, the local plan needs to be read comprehensively, and it needs to be read across with policy 59, which states development will be expected to provide or contribute towards the provision of measures to directly mitigate the impact of development and make it acceptable in planning terms. So what we're envisaging is this will only be the case where development exacerbates a deficiency in existing provision. We're not seeking to expect developers to just mitigate existing deficiencies.
So I suppose, I think to get straight to your point, I think the expression where appropriate is not necessarily aligning with the SIL requirements of necessity and reasonableness. So what Mr. Clifford said is correct. So developers will be expected to deal with any deficiencies in existing provision where it's necessary to do so to make the development acceptable. So that SIL requirement is there, whatever the policy says in any event, so that is the bottom line. It would be possible, of course, to do a slight modification to the policy to make that clear.
Thank you. I'm going to jump around the agenda, which is not always the best thing, but we seem to be in the same area, and it was item 4 on my agenda, and I think various representations that were made in terms of policies SP25 and policy 59 sailing quite close to one another in what they were seeking to do. And I think the council, for its statement, is minded to look at this, or whether what he's suggesting, Mr. Shadaravian, could be brought into that as well. I think is it just a policy 59? There's no, it's not a strategic.
Sorry, I meant policy 59.
No, yep.
In relation to policy 59 and its relationship to SP25, I think we acknowledge that there's some overlap and that the two could potentially be integrated together. We'd be open to that if that was something you felt was appropriate.
Or the alternative, we take out or amend policy 59 if it's repeating some of the strategic. I think there's a modification in there somewhere.
Yeah, there's a modification in there. Sorry, I've got 2 red lights. I apologise. To bring it in line with the SIL regs and to avoid any confusion at development management stage, and also to make sure the two policies are consistent. So we will look at that.
Ms Eggleston, please.
I was just wanted to pick up the point which I think has sort of just been made, in that I did see in the council statement that they were considering perhaps redrafting those two policies so that they didn't necessarily overlap with each other, but also whether or not there is a point, the point in doing so to clarify the matter about addressing existing deficiencies, which in our view isn't consistent with national policy, and particularly from a transport basis, then the test in terms of severe impacts is obviously significantly higher than that of addressing existing deficiencies. So that those two things seemed inconsistent, and I think in paragraph 59 it is worded more clearly and seems to be more consistent with policy.
Councillor Kilgore.
Thank you, sir. I just think we need to exercise caution in that area, in that around the existing deficiencies. So obviously I'm going to relate that back to SP8, but whatever those deficiencies are or not, I would be really cautious around what the expectation was from a local planning authority to, or local authority to put right. And then the top up being as a result of development. I think we need to be really cautious as to what the expectation of the local authority is likely to be, and if they can meet that.
Thank you. Mr Green.
Yes, sorry, sir. Just to highlight the fact that, you know, with the existing transport deficiencies, it's actually the housing development that's creating the need to have them improved. Does that make sense? So yeah, so they're responsible for it in the first place, so it should be included.
Okay, thank you. I've noted the council's statement, and if that goes forward as a main modification, then obviously people will have an opportunity to comment on that in due course. Moving on in terms of the agenda, policy 50 then sits alongside or follows on from policy SP25. It's around social and community infrastructure. And my question at MIQ 11.3 was whether this would provide a justified and effective approach in securing that type of infrastructure over the plan period. Mr Clifford.
Yes, sir, we believe it will provide a justified and effective approach. The IDP provides a resource for identifying needs. For example, Table 11, impact on planned development on primary school places, identifies the primary school places that will be required. And this assists in providing the context for parts 1 and 2 of the policy, which both refer to identified needs. As set out in the supporting text of the policy, developers are also encouraged to work collaboratively with the council and other key stakeholders regarding the identification and meeting of the social and community infrastructure needs that may arise from development. Parts 2 Roman italic 1 and Part 2 Roman italic 2 of the policy link to the spatial vision. As referenced, the need for school places has been identified in the IDP. However, both for school places and other community needs, there may be some circumstances where it cannot be predicted, and that results in unforeseen needs. It's important, therefore, that the plan provides the flexibility to require the provision of land and/or the capital cost of new facilities where the need arises from new development. And this provides the context to Part 2 Roman italic 3 of the policy. So I think, taken in the round, it is a sound policy. I would also reference that the plan provides the flexibility to require the provision. So I think I've already referenced that. Yeah, I think that completes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hutchinson, for the East Boldon Forum. You've obviously made representations, I think, on you query the effectiveness of this policy.
Yes, thank you, sir. You perhaps won't be surprised to hear that the Forum considers that Policy 50 is not sound, as it does not contain sufficient detail about how appropriate social and community infrastructure will be provided to cater for the impact of the new development on our community. The East Boldon Neighbourhood Plan has a key policy on community services and facilities to support the provision of new and enhancement of existing community facilities. The plan also has a community action about enhancing community services and facilities, and the Forum's been working proactively with the community, supporting the development of a sporting hub and other local facilities. The Forum considers that the neighbourhood plan will have a key role in addressing the impact of a 26% increase in households resulting from proposed new development in the village on the health and well-being of the residents of East Boldon. In recent years, there's been a loss of community facilities in the village, such as the closure of the United Reformed Church Hall and the Methodist Church Hall more recently. And schools and medical facilities are already under extreme pressure. So we feel that Policy 50 should include an acknowledgement of the policies within the neighbourhood plan. The Council, in its statement, highlights the supporting text which states that developers are encouraged to work collaboratively with the Council and with other key stakeholders regarding the identification and meeting social and community infrastructure needs that may arise from any development. The past experience of the Forum is that we haven't been sufficiently involved in this, the development at Cleeden Lane being a good example of that. The Forum is clearly a key stakeholder, and that's why we would want the Council to consider putting that text within the policy itself, the text from the neighbourhood plan. The Council's statement in response to question 11.3 also focuses on the impact of planned development on primary school places. It highlights the spatial vision for the local plan, which states that residents will have a choice of schools and nurseries, community and healthcare facilities. However, as we argued at the Stage 1 hearings, the IDP does not provide answers as to how these additional places will be provided. In fact, we heard the Council give evidence that the choice for parents may well lie outside of East Boldon, which is not a satisfactory situation. Secondary school pupils already have to travel to Whitburn, but for infant and primary school pupils to do the same, I think would be very onerous on the parents. In summary, I'd just like to say in conclusion that Policy 50 should be amended to provide more detail about how the delivery of appropriate social and community infrastructure will be achieved to mitigate the impact of this new development on local communities. Thank you.
Thank you for that, and I've obviously got the neighbourhood plan in front of me as an examination document. I understood from the Council's position there's a balance here in terms of flexibility. In terms of what I've heard, is there any further points that the Council wish to make?
No, not really. The point is understood, and I don't acknowledge your concerns, but this is a borough-wide policy, and the normal consultation procedures will take place in relation to each application as it comes forward. The policy is deliberately widely structured because you need that flexibility when it comes to consider individual planning applications, which generate their own particular needs in terms of community infrastructure. So it's not possible at this sort of strategic level to predict what needs will need to be satisfied in relation to what development at what particular time. And that includes the provision of primary and secondary school places as well, because things change over time. But what the policy does admit, and assuming that the consultation procedures will be carried out according to the law, is that there is the basis here for the local planning authority to insist upon obligations or contributions that meet statutory test of reasonableness and necessity.
Thank you. Is there anything further, Mr. Hutchinson?
Could I just come back on that? Yes, I mean, I take the point that you're making there, but given that there's probably a degree of certainty that a lot of the schemes proposed in the local plan will come to fruition, it seems short-sighted of the council not to provide some indication as to how those additional places will be provided. We know how many houses are going to be built, therefore it's not a difficult task to predict how many new children and school places will be required. So I don't see that that is something which cannot be done as part of the local plan.
School places and school provisions, as you know, is a very dynamic issue and changes over time, depending upon what's built where, population changes, demographic changes, and as the inspector made clear earlier on, some of these developments are coming on well into the future. It's impossible to make those kinds of predictions at this stage.
Thank you, and I understand the respective positions, and I'll reflect on what you've advised me this morning, Mr. Hutchinson. Going to hear briefly from, I think it's Councillor Kilgour and then Mr. Green. As I said, I want relatively concise contributions because this morning is, I think, my only opportunity to hear from Mr. Mail in terms of transport evidence, so we need to get on to the transport part of the discussion. So,
Sir, may I allow Mr. Green to go first?
Okay.
Yes, in relation to policy SP26, new developments are sold on the fact that they encourage and promote sustainable transport and travel. So what?
Sorry, we're not at this part of the agenda.
Right, I do
We're
apologise.
going to come on to SP26.
Right. All right. Councillor Kilgour.
Thank you. So I think as we've been talking about school places, and I do accept that it is very fluid, and the ownership and a different policy with regards to providing additional places with developers, I think that's really important to note. By way of school places, I'm not convinced that I'm a chair of governors at St Joseph's Catholic Academy in Hebburn, and I'm not convinced that the data around the availability of places there has been considered, and I know that from a governor perspective rather than from a plan perspective. You know, this particular year we are currently massively oversubscribed, so I think it is something that we do need to look at in order that our children don't have to travel. As Mr Hutchinson has said, I think it's really important, but I think the provision of those spaces is really relevant, and when we're talking about local infrastructure, we're also talking about the road off onto Durham Drive from SP8. So I think that's all to be kind of considered in there, if I can refer to that correctly. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't necessarily want to hear from, I heard earlier from Mr Clifford about engagement with the schools places manager. So, okay. Just finally on policy 50 and various issues that have been raised in relation to the policy. It's my MIQ 11.4. I think this came from the NHS operational or certainly from a division somewhere within the NHS in terms of a specific issue around policy 50. I think this comes to when there's issues around disposal of their estate, and I think the council has suggested a modification to policy 50 in relation to that, not specifically for the NHS, but the wider point, I think, where surplus public sector buildings estate comes forward.
Yes, sir, that's correct. We don't see a logic in making it specific to the NHS, considering the point that was made in the representation we think is equally applicable to other key public service providers. So we've broadened it out in our proposed modification.
Thank you, and that will be subject to consultation if it goes forward. Councillor Kilgour, briefly.
So just very quickly, I think referring back to the NHS there, so in SP8 there is the kind of, you know, option put forward of a GP practice. I think that is all in the mix as well. I think we need to really consider about deliverability on that, about that that resource, how deliverable is it, and that is really, really important.
Thank you. That concludes everything that I want to raise under matter 11 issue 1 on the borough-wide infrastructure policies. We're now going to move on to issue 2, which is the borough-wide policies around promoting sustainable transport. My first point and issue I wanted to raise, just check. Is in relation to policy SP26. I'll come to you shortly, Mr. Green, on this. But first, I think I turn to whether it would be Mr. Mayle or somebody else within the council, Mr. Clifford, in terms of obviously policy SP26 is a strategic policy in terms of delivering sustainable transport. Obviously sets out a number of policy objectives around active travel, public transport, all the things you perhaps expect to see in terms of managing the demand for additional car-based travel. But one consistent theme I think that had arisen in various representations was around the justification that new homes, new commercial development is located no more than 400 metres from a bus stop. And I think just raised practical questions in terms of what that would mean on the ground, and I think the council's helpfully set that out in its matter 11 statement. If I can just ask the council briefly to just explain where that 400 metre distance came from and what it kind of practicably means. Just looking at the map of the borough, it seems that most parts of the borough would be within 400 metres.
Yes, sir, I'm happy to come in on that point. I think from a local authority perspective, we have to resort to set standards and criteria, and we've utilised the Sustrans, who are now renamed as Wheeled, Walking, and I forget the other acronym, but I think from our perspective, when it comes to sort of assessing plan applications and future sites, we have to conform to standards, and this is an appropriate standard that is also used by Nexus, as in the Tyne-and-Wear Passenger Transport Executive. From our perspective, we recognise as part of our submissions that in terms of applying this logic, there will be parts of the borough that don't conform to that standard, but I think as we discussed yesterday, there is a standing requirement that was discussed that in terms of any future sites coming forward where they don't meet that standard, it will be expected that a provision of a regular bus service alongside that of the infrastructure would support that and would improve the situation, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. So where there are kind of gaps on the map that's provided in the statement, if a new development came forward and provided a new bus stop to a standard acceptable to the Transport Authority, that would overcome or address that particular aspect, yeah.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. And then in terms of policy SB 26 and my MIQ 11.7, I'm going to go back to the statement of common ground with national highways. I think they were seeking an amendment to part 3 of the policy, subpart 3, I think removing the final part of that text. I think the council has agreed to this, so that would be a modification.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Thank you. Miss Eggleston, please.
We have made representations on the 400-metre bus stop, and so that's set out in our note. But it was just to pick up on that second point on the text in the Statement of Common Ground. We're supportive of the change to the paragraph 3, part 3 change, where it was removing the part about the cumulative impact in car-based trips. But I also note in the Statement of Common Ground that National Highways have asked that some new text is added to paragraph 1414 underneath that, which seeks to replicate part of footnote 21, which is from Circular 122. But it only part replicates it, and in our representations then we had noted that we didn't feel that was necessary because that remit is already covered within the circular per se, and also if it was going to be included within the policy that it should be included in full, because within the circular it does place a distinction about how the assessment should be carried out if a development proposal is in accordance with an up-to-date plan and where one isn't. Whereas the part replication within the policy only dealt with the scenario which in effect would be if a development isn't in accordance with the plan, then you have to take account of all developments within the plan. So I think it's important that if text is going to be replicated within the policy, it should be replicated in full, or else it shouldn't be included, in which case it is already picked up within the circular, and so that would be a requirement that National Highways would have that that ability to require that in any case, in any discussions on the scope of any assessment undertaken.
Thank you. I think my recollection from the Statement of Common Ground is there's the proposed change to that part of the policy, and I think the additional text, if memory serves, was not suggested as a main modification, as something that was necessary for soundness, but as what's commonly referred to as a minor modification. And whether there's an issue, which if I came to that view, would obviously not be within my remit. It would be something that could be added to the plan, but if there's an issue about its, I don't know if the council wants to take that away in terms of the fullness of what's...
Yeah, I think we'll take that away because it's an issue which has arisen in relation to other national, particularly Greenbelt and matters like that. We'll take it away and see how best to deal with it. I mean, there are two options. Actually, on reflection, I think any modification to a policy which alters the sense of that policy is a main mod, not minor. So that's the first observation I make. So I think we were probably wrong to suggest it's just minor.
I'm not suggesting the change to policy SP26 part 3 sub 3 is
right. So
that would be
that
would be a main modification. If I supporting text, which I think is where Miss Eggleston was coming from, that seeks to kind of draw on DFT Circular 122. I think the Statement of Common Ground was suggested that we don't need to do this for soundness, but we will. So, yeah. I
misunderstood what you were saying, sorry. So in relation to that point, it will probably be best, if we're going to include it, to include a reference to the whole thing, so it's not misleading.
Thank you. Are there any further points people wish to make on policy SP26? Mr. Green.
Yes, so I was just to say, I'll repeat myself again with this, sorry I fell before. New developments are sold on the fact that they encourage and promote sustainable transport and travel. So what difference would this make? Isn't give priority pedestrians referring to a bus user? So I agree with policy SP26.
Councillor Kilgour.
Thanks, sir. I'm just a little bit confused around what needs to go in and come out. I do think it's major. I think when I'm reading point 3 there, to contribute towards by way of developer contribution, what again, I'm going to raise concerns around the proportionality in relation to SP8 that will have. And I'm not quite sure, I don't want it diluted as to the responsibility that the developer would have there. And whether there's a circular or not, I think our policy needs to stipulate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before I move off, policy SP26, we've had various kind of discussions at this examination around vision-led transport planning. It's what's picked up in the circular. Whilst I have the benefit of Mr. Mail in the room, just generally, I mean, apologies if I asked this at the stage 1 hearing sessions, but I'll ask again if there's any kind of emerging kind of local, either to the borough or through the combined authority, about what kind of vision-led approach might look like, and whether there are things that are likely to be prioritised as part of that approach. I know some authorities are starting to think about, through local transport plans, etc., this is what a vision-led approach would mean for our particular area, and I'm just curious as to...
Thank you, sir. I think it's appropriate to reference, from a combined authority perspective, we've recently just had our regional transport plan endorsed. That said, the council is currently refreshing its local and cycling walking infrastructure plan. This plan was adopted by the council in 2021, running for 5 years. So it's appropriate that we are refreshing this document, and by all means, taking heed of the results of this week, we can certainly embed the vision-led approach into that refresh of the document. I think it's appropriate at this point to say that in terms of sustainability, our first onset is to try to ensure that sustainable modes can be accessible, whether that's through walking, through cycling, through using public transport, before we even resort to what car-based trips are going to result from the network. And that isn't just for SP8, it's for across the whole of the local plan that's in front of you as part of this examination. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, I'll move on in terms of the agenda. We'll move on to policy 51 of the plan. Again, borough-wide policy that sets out a number of criteria, requirements in relation to improvements to the road network. And my question at MIQ 11.8 were whether those were justified in terms of the various schemes that are identified. They're separated out by the strategic road networks, schemes that relate to national highways, and then specific local highway network projects that are at the more local level, at the borough level. Whether those project schemes are identified and whether anything needs to further change in light of all the discussion we've had around Whitemare Pool and other factors. So I don't know who's going to first take me through the response to MIQ 11.8.
Thank you, sir. You're quite correct that there does need to be some changes to policy 51. Those changes are set out in the council's response to MIQ 11.8. The justification is set out in full in table 2, so I won't go right through the justification unless you wish me to. So the changes are policy criterion 1 Roman italic 1. We're proposing to delete where it says junction improvements for A19 stroke A185 stroke Tyne Tunnel. The evidence no longer supports that as a requirement. Policy 1 Roman italic 2, we're proposing to delete A19 lane gain, lane drop scheme. I think we've already set out in our response to your action point 12 that we consider that's no longer required, and National Highways support that. And then moving on to policy criterion 2, Roman italic 2, A18, it's really a clarification matter, A185 improvements between, we suggest inserting Gateshead boundary A185 and deleting A194, and after A19 adding Tyne Tunnel, so I think it's just making something a bit clearer than it previously was. Thank you.
Thank you. And just looking, excuse me, at that second part of the list, so there's the A194 corridor between Lindisfarne and Whitemare Pool remains in there. It's just a clarification on that first point. So just coming back to the strategic highway network projects, well, it will be a singular project, Whitemare Pool. As part of that policy, the other two elements will go. And National Highways were seeking through the Statement of Common Ground that they would want this identified on the policies map. I think there's a plan with a kind of like a star symbol on Whitemare Pool. If that's the case, I think under part 1 of the policy, it'd be strategic highway network project as shown on the policies map, and then it'd be clear where that relates to. And then when we get to main modifications, there'll be a further schedule that would show where the policy map change that would relate to. In terms of, I understand the clarification to the, I'll call it the local highway network. Just to assist me on point 2 of that, so the A194 corridor between Lindisfarne and Whitemare Pool, is there a kind of a scheme, a programme, or will this encompass things like the Mill Lane roundabout improvements?
Yes, I'm happy to come in there. I think for our perspective, it's trying to adopt a corridor-based approach. So obviously the 185 runs from sort of the Bilkey area into the Hebburn area, commencing at the first junction in Surgeon, which you've identified at Mill Lane 185. It's a residential bound carriageway, but that said, it provides a good connection into the new Tyne tunnels as well. So I think it's just recognising that we will appraise that level of context in a corridor-based format. There's a range of strategic points across the corridor where modifications can be made to traffic signal timings and so forth to ensure better transition of traffic, but hopefully that addresses that point, sir. Thanks.
So just so I'm clear, so that's the A194.
So it's the A185. Sorry, sir. It's the I don't know what name. It's Victoria Road. It's got various names throughout the corridor, but it's basically from the 185 through to the Tyne tunnels. 194 is a separate matter that's considered across the range of junctions that are identified.
And that's probably where I wanted to go to, is because it's in the policy at policy 51.
Yep.
It's part 2. It talks about the A194 corridor. That's obviously been the subject of a lot of debate. And
No, it's all right.
is it a similar approach?
Similar
there,
approach
Mr.
to the
Mayor?
194. Yeah, certainly.
Okay. Thank you. So policy 51, improving capacity on the road network. I think if people have followed that discussion, so several projects will two of the projects come out of the strategic highway part of the policy in relation to what I heard yesterday. I appreciate people might not agree with that, so I want to understand that. And then it sets out sort of a menu of projects for the local kind of road network, which the council is seeking to clarify the first bullet point. So do you want me to hear from Mr Green first, or Councillor Kilgour?
Yes, sir. Thanks, sir. Residents know the pressure that's currently on the current road infrastructure, sir. I mean, in relation to what Mr Mills just said, the A185 in Victoria West Hebburn Station Road is going to have a housing development which is Brockhurst. I think it's 166 next to the old college site. That's a plan with Gateshead, but there's also a new housing development going on the new college site, which we've just discussed. That is exiting on the A185. You've got a brand new development which appeared on Victoria Road, you know, a couple of years ago, which is putting pressure on the A185. You've got the Hawthorne and Leslie site, which is putting 466 new homes, and the primary access route from that development is going to be directly onto the 8185 heading down the Tyne Tunnel. Now, you know, the new, what they're trying to put in is they're trying to take out the infrastructure that's required at the Tyne Tunnel. Now, the A185 comes down to the Tyne Tunnel and heads into South Shields. And the infrastructure that's there must stay. I totally disagree with taking any of this out because none of it's funded. It's a vision-led approach, as they say, but the fact remains that the current pressure on all of these road networks is severe. I mean, the one on the A185 on Victoria Road is critical, sir, and it's Section 106 funding and external funding, and that's meant to be done by 2030. I believe it's to do with the Section 106 from the Hawthorne and Leslie development. Now, the Hawthorne and Leslie development has also got a Section 106 for the improvements that are to be made off the B1306, which is Mill Lane, which comes onto the A185. I believe they've got £200,000, which from the conversation yesterday may now go into the putting money towards Whitemere Pool roundabout. You know, it could be taken away from the local network and put into the Whitemere Pool roundabout. And I'm just concerned that if all this is taken out, you know, money that's being put aside for a local project is going to go into the major infrastructure, which is the Whitemere Pool roundabout. And we did discuss that yesterday. So I did mention actually in a CAF meeting to do with Trevor Mail, you know, a number of weeks ago, which I haven't got the minutes for yet.
Can I just pick up that point, Mr. Mayor? In terms of the first project that's taken out from part 1 of the policy, the junction improvements A19, A185 Tyne Tunnel, was that intended to be very specific and localised to the Tyne Tunnel end of the A1?
I think it's important to raise that the change between 1.1 and 2.11 is basically it's the same. We're not taking anything out. There's still probably a need at that respective junction to make improvements at the Tyne Tunnel, as to what Mr. Green's just said. What we're trying to say is the A185 adopting a premise of a corridor-based approach. If junctions are triggered through the site-specific transport assessments and it demonstrates that the junction's oversaturated, we will negotiate through the planning process what needs to happen up there. Mr. Green's right, the £200,000 for the Hawthorne Leslie site has been secured, and we've got a range of improvements planned at that respective junction as and when the application comes forward. So again, I think without dwelling too much on the issues, this isn't foreseen as taking things out. It's just a change on the wording, sir. Thank you.
Councillor Kilgour, please.
Thank you, sir. I strongly would oppose any amendment there, certainly to point 2. Very clearly what is happening is that in relation to SP8, the provision for the lane gain and lane drop is being taken out of policy, which means that there's no policy requirement of the developer or anyone else to afford the residents that I represent and the rest of the residents in the borough the same as that was afforded to Tesco's. And that over on the north side through the Tyne Tunnel and the lane drop, lane gain at the Silverlink as well. So we are, in effect, being treated, in my opinion, as second-class citizens. We are being expected to not only lose our green belt, which we absolutely will rail against doing forevermore, but to also facilitate a policy that does not support us at all with that new development. And with the figures that Mr. Green has mentioned this morning, a vision-led approach and a continual. We're looking to adopt a plan now, sirs, as you know. We know that it's historic. We know that it's gone on many years, and certainly within the last 2 years particularly. But at the point of adoption, we know that these figures that Mr. Green has cited are absolutely correct. They come from the data source that has been used in the robust figures and in the vision-led figures. I would urge you not to remove that requirement, because that frees up, with respect, the developer to not pay any credit to the residents that will be affected by that. As well, Tesco's, when it was developed, we heard yesterday and we heard from Trevor as well today around there was no residential accommodation around Tesco's. There isn't. It's all highway infrastructure. So what we're looking at here is a highly populated area, potentially greater populated moving forward, all of the additional population of Hebburn leading into the network that Mr Green's just talked about, yet they want to drop out of the policy, the lane gain and the lane drop. Absolutely not, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to move on to other people, so Mr Hutchison next, please.
Yes, thank you, sir. Our comments are specifically on policy, where are we now? Bear with me.
We should be on
51.
51, yep.
Roman numeral 7. Your question relates to that, and it states that working with Network Rail to assess the implications of a full barrier operation at Tileshed and Bolden level crossings. In our quite detailed submission to the examiner in response to question 11.8, in the absence of any current assessment by the council, we set out in detail the likely implications for traffic flows resulting from the development of new housing in and around East Bolden, including a detailed appendix showing the impact of proposed developments on all of the main junctions, including the tile sheds and Station Road crossings. These junctions are already currently most oversubscribed, so if all proposed new development does take place, the situation will become unsustainable for the village, which has, as we've said in previous submissions, Victorian infrastructure and very little scope for improvement to the junctions in question. I don't intend to restate the large amount of detail that we did include in our submission, but we showed that if the current draft local plan is approved, 1,396 new dwellings will be built over the next 7 or 8 years in the vicinity of East Bolden, which are likely to have a significant impact on the traffic flows on both of those level crossings. In particular, 263 dwellings at North Farm, 259 at West Farm in Clevedon, 190 at Shooter Reed, and 202 are very likely to be approved shortly for Clevedon Lane. They will themselves add significantly to the existing numbers using the crossings. I think it's also worth noting that the council commissioned an assessment of the impact on the junctions from Sistra, and the impact from the Clevedon Lane development wasn't included in that because at the time it wasn't part of the housing allocation. So we've obviously got those additional 202 houses from Clevedon Lane on top of the Sistra assessment. As everybody will know, traffic already backs up significantly at these crossings at peak times, and the extra journeys resulting from these new developments will very quickly make the position unsustainable. On top of all of the new development, I believe it's also the case that the frequency of metro journeys is likely to improve in the near future. I believe that Nexus are proposing to increase the frequency from the current 12 minutes to 10 minutes, which would obviously make the situation at the crossings even worse. In the absence of any current council assessment, we provided the inspector with a detailed analysis of the likely impact of both a flyover, which is the subject of one of your questions, sir, and the double barrier system at Tileshed's crossing. In summary, we believe that in its submission to the inspector, the council appears to exempt itself from responsibility for dealing with this issue and puts the onus fully onto Network Rail. Surely the council is accountable and must take responsibility for ensuring that appropriate infrastructure is in place to deal with the impact of new housing that it's included in its local plan. Thank you.
Thank you. We've kind of It is related to policy 51, but we've kind of moved on to MIQ 11.8. Is there anything, I appreciate I heard from Mr. Mail in relation to earlier this week at the Shooter Eid site, but similar issue here.
Thank you, sir. I think, as I stated earlier in the week, we very much foresee the level crossings as an asset of Network Rail, which is the case. Network Rail are a key consultee, both in the local plan terms, but then also as part of any respective site-specific plan application that come forward. I think it's important to raise that in terms of the recent care home application, this was submitted to our planning committee. Network Rail made responses. Their response at the time was that they did not object to the application. That said, they wanted a reflection to state they would like to know the impact of both Bolden level crossing, which is on Benton Road, to that of also at Talsheds, which has been the case. And I think from our perspective, what we try and do alongside that of National Highways, we try and have quarterly meetings with Network Rail, which is in our written statements. If indeed Network Rail foresee a need to improve the level crossings, it would be at their discretion, and we would therefore determine, as a result of that implication or potential infrastructure, the likely traffic impact of that. I think at this moment in time, we do not yet know what Network Rail want to do with the level crossings, so it would be wrongful of us to foresee whether full barriers and or any alternative means to close the level crossings would come forward. So that is our position, sir. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Hutchinson.
Yes, can I come back on that? Just in relation to Childsheds Crossing, I believe that Nexus have stated that they are looking at the introduction of full barrier crossings rather than the half barrier. Is that not still the case?
I'm slightly confused because I thought this Network Rail...
Yes, it's Network Rail, but I think it would be wrongful of me to navigate that point on behalf of Network Rail. Obviously, there is a range of infrastructure options available to Network Rail. Sometimes they do indeed close level crossings with the introduction of a flyover, but as it stands, it would be wrongful of the council to respond on behalf of Network Rail.
I think from the forum's perspective, Mr. Hutchinson, obviously the policy, excuse me, policy 51 refers to the council working with Network Rail to assess the full implications of these crossings. Is it the forum's position there needs to be more in the policy, there needs to be more kind of detail? That's not going to be effective?
Yes, I think so. I mean, we've in previous comments this morning, we've talked about the need to provide more certainty in the local plan as to how the implications of all the new developments will be dealt with. And you know, the council's saying that they'll work with Network Rail to assess the implications of full barrier operation at the crossings. The council surely will have to deal with any traffic issues that stem from that. And as Trevor will be acutely aware, we've already have significant tailbacks at the Station Road crossing next to the metro station. And if we do have full barrier crossings at Talsheds, then the same problem will occur there. Things are bad enough already, but as I've outlined, with the impact of all the new housing developments, that's only likely to get significantly worse. Thank you.
So I wonder if I might just deal with some misconceptions about what this policy is intended to do. It's not in any way meant to dilute the duty of this local authority to make a proper assessment of highway conditions and capacity, having regard to any changes Network Rail might cause to its own network, including the crossings. We will work with them to understand what it is they're going to do and to understand the implications of what they're going to do. That's the first point. Second point is this policy merely sets out the local planning authority's intention to improve capacity on the road network, and specifically in relation to these particular junctions where it's necessary. These are identified as necessary improvements. There will be other matters arising, other improvements identified at development management stage, So when a proposal comes forward, it will be assessed. And if other improvements on the local highway network are required, then they will be required. So this policy is looking at major improvements overall and what the council intends to do about those. So, and on that basis, the junction improvements to the Tyne Tunnel, that is criterion small 1 of paragraph 1, is being deleted because it's no longer seen as being necessary.
Thank you. Before I move on to policy 52, Mr. Green, briefly.
Yeah, just very briefly, so I disagree with that, because if it's taken out, surely it will take it out of the local plan, unless I'm misreading this. If they take that out, it's no longer the policy that's then related to the local plan, unless I'm getting confused. But it hasn't been, you know, the traffic data is indicating, which was even put through at Reg 19, is indicating that that is needed. You can't just take it out, and if the wording's taken out, then it disappears.
Thank you. I think I understood, and then I'll give the council an opportunity to correct me if I've got the wrong end of the wrong stick. The scheme that was identified for the strategic road network is no longer necessary, but notwithstanding that, the second part of the policy in terms of the local highway network includes the A185 corridor through Hebburn, Jarrow, through to the Tyne Tunnel A19.
Yes, it leads on to the Tyne Tunnel. Yeah, it goes right through from Heworth, right through to the Tyne Tunnel and on to South Shields. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move on to policy 52, please. This is safeguarding land for metro and rail development. I've asked a couple of MIQs around this. So just one MIQ on this, which is whether what's being shown or what's being sought through the policy is appropriately shown on the policies map. So the policy seeks to safeguard land for a new metro station at Mill Lane in Hebburn, and then further land for a new metro station at Follingsbury. And I think looking at the council's statement, I think there are a couple of mapping changes that are now proposed. It'd be helpful for me to just understand what those are.
Thank you, sir. Firstly, in relation to the Follingsby Lane, the changes are shown in the council's response to MIQ 11.9, and basically it's seeking to identify very clearly the land which is safeguarded for the provision of the new metro rail station. And in terms of why that's required, there's the whole context around the Leamside line. It's been a long-standing ambition to reopen the mothballed Leamside line, and that has cross-party support, and its reopening is also supported by the North East Transport Plan, and the Mayor's announced funding to support delivery. In terms of the change to provision of a new metro station at Mill Lane, Hebburn, the modification to that really just reflects evidence to make it clearer as to precisely what is going to be required to be safeguarded. So previously, it wasn't as clear as it now is, and that reflects work that has been undertaken looking at the deliverability of the metro, of a station in that location. So we have evidence to support that.
Thank you. Can I just take the Mill Lane proposed changes first, because I'm afraid I don't quite follow them. So just perhaps help understand what area is being safeguarded. Is it the large sort of hexagonal, broadly sort of hexagonal shaped, orange brown area?
It's that plain. It's designated as a grassed area. So alongside that of the fire station, which the council already holds in it.
So we're pointing to it now. Yeah.
So it's the two orange.
Yeah, the two orange segments. Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Three orange segments. Sorry.
So just to be clear, sir, it's these three orange segments.
Is that a reflection of kind of optioneering that could be any sort of a combination of those three?
Yeah, yes, sir. Early work has proceeded alongside that with Nexus, just to see what can be delivered on the site. They're obviously subject to securing appropriate funding. It's in the fairly early stages of option development, but it gives an indication largely as to what land space would be required if indeed a metro station was ever to come to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you. And then just finally, in relation to the Follingsbury site and safeguarding the land there, just a thought that crossed my mind probably too late in the day. Is this going to require a greenbelt alteration?
Well, the land is currently designated as part of the Greenbelt. So in that sense, yes, it would require a Greenbelt alteration.
So I'll need to conclude whether exceptional circumstances exist.
I would like to reflect on that over the weekend, and perhaps we can come back to it very shortly next week.
So in terms of safeguarding Metro, my recollection from stage one is there was some discussion about whether Mill Lane was going to come forward. Is that still an ambition?
Yes, sir, that's correct. It's an ambition of the council, and we will explore external funding opportunities through the Transport Facility Regions with the North East Combined Authority, sir. Thanks.
Thank you. Is it Mr Green first? Or Councillor?
Yes, sir. It's just, I don't know whether I misheard Mr Clifford saying that the funding has been granted for this, by the way. I don't believe it has. No, it could be me hearing. The funding for the Mill Lane, the new metro station?
No funding has been secured yet, sir.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. And where it is actually going to go, sir, that's where I mentioned before, the £200,000 from Hawthorne Leslie is to develop that whole junction where they're trying to safeguard the land, but it's pointless developing the whole junction if there's a new metro station going in, and it's just all higgledy-piggledy. It's all over the place, if I want of a better expression.
Thank you. Councillor Kilgour, please.
Thank you, sir. I'd just like to understand a little more around the Mill Lane metro station, please, and if Trevor could confirm the funding that's come through for the metro stations, or that has been granted in relation to this, please.
That's fine, sir. Obviously, the council has got a role and responsibility to investigate major projects and so forth. So, whilst no funding has been secured from the North East Combined Authority, we are still exploring future projects as it stands within the Strategic Transport Department. So, to answer the question, no funding has been awarded from an external perspective, but as we see fit, we will investigate schemes subject to securing internal funding, sir. Thanks.
if I may say, just come back to that. I think that's the point. I think we are very aspirational as a borough. Unfortunately, aspirations have to exist, and they absolutely do. But from my perspective, I think we've just been awarded a significant amount of funding from Mayor McGuinness. And I think, we'll have to be realistic around what is likely to come forward. I know there's other external streams, if you like, but reality at this moment in time, particularly for the decision at this planned time, and where you would support another removal from the green belt on a possible, it may not be exceptional. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further points around policy 52, safeguarding? No. In which case, I had no further questions in relation to transport at this stage, so I'm going to bring today's session to its conclusion. Made various notes, I think, of modifications that have been discussed, potential things that will be followed up. Before I close, are there any further points people wish to raise on transport policies for the borough-wide transport? There's been a reasonable opportunity to discuss that. So I'm going to close now. I think we're back in this room, looking at Annette, at 10 o'clock on Tuesday next week, where we're picking up further matters. So have a good weekend, everybody, and I'll see some of you next week.